You're listening to the Full and Thriving Podcast, a place where courageous women come to break free from food obsession, heal their relationship with their body, and strive to live a life that's present, lighthearted, and meaningful. If you're listening, my wish is that this podcast serves as a catalyst that inspires you to nourish your body, nurture your mind, and energize your spirit. I'm your host, Meg McCabe, a certified life coach and eating disorder recovery coach with a PhD in having a good time. Just kidding about that last part. Anyway, thank you so much for listening and enjoy the show. Hey, Full and Thriving fam. I wanted to let you in on something super exciting. As you know, we open the doors to the Recovery Collective only 3 times a year, and the next round is coming up for a limited time between January 19th and February 1st. This is honestly the best time for you to join the Recovery Collective because when you join, you will also get access to every single recorded session for all of 2023, completely for free. So, if you purchase your membership sometime between January 19th and February 1st, you will be able to access the upcoming 2024 sessions live and watch all the replays from 2023. I cannot think of a better deal than that. So please be sure to mark your calendars and go to recoverycollective.mykajabi.com to get on the wait list so you can be the first to know when doors open on the 19th. Curious to know what it's like inside? Here's what our current members are saying.
My favorite part about the Recovery Collective is that as of joining about a year ago, I finally realized how important it is to have a community in recovery.
It was definitely a turning point for me to finally talk to someone who's understanding.
The people in the Recovery Collective are some of the most lovely, supportive people I've ever met.
If you're thinking about joining the Recovery Collective, I have 2 words to say to you. Do it. Literally just give it a chance. I think you will be surprised in the most wonderful way.
Make the jump and join. It's honestly one of the best things I ever did, and I've made some of my best friends from around the world.
It's a safe place for me. I know I can say anything and never get judged for it. And I feel that we all truly care about each other.
Well, there you have it. Our members have spoken. And I might be a little biased, but I think our community is pretty great too. For more information, check out the link in the show notes and make sure you sign up for the waiting list so you can be the first to join our community between January 19th and February 1st. Do you have trouble communicating your needs or expressing yourself fully to your friends, family, and even your recovery team? Do you worry about hurting other people's feelings when you directly communicate about something or try to set a boundary? Do you wonder how assertive communication is directly linked to healing your eating disorder and your relationship with food? In today's episode, I dive into this topic of healing through communication, specifically assertive communication, with the one and only Dr. Anita Johnston. Dr. Johnston is a clinical psychologist, author, and renowned expert in the field of eating disorders and women's issues. She is best known for her groundbreaking work and her influential book, Eating in the Light of the Moon. Dr. Johnston has dedicated her career to helping individuals struggling with eating disorders, promoting a holistic approach that addresses the emotional, psychological, and spiritual aspects of recovery. To support your healing journey, Dr. Johnston and I have been putting together an exciting collaboration for months that we are kicking off in 2024. To learn more about healing through communication and everything that we've been up to together, please join us for a free live event on January 18th at 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. There will be more details to come on that during my next episode of the show. Also, I've created another fun quiz for all of you to take related to this topic called What is Your Recovery Communication Style? So, if you're intrigued by this topic and want to dive into how your communication style is impacting your recovery, please go to the link in the show notes to find out what your recovery communication style is. And with that, I hope you enjoy this episode of the show. Hi, Anita. Welcome to the show.
Hi, nice to be here.
Oh, it's so great to have you here. I know we've connected a few times in the past, and I'm just so ready to have you on the show today. I cannot wait to hear from you. So thank you so much for being here today.
You're welcome. Let's do it.
Yes, let's do it. Okay, so before we dive into everything, I would love to have you share a bit about your background and your journey in the eating disorder recovery space. If you can share just a little, I know you have a lengthy history at this point, 30 years or more in the space, but if you could summarize like your journey, I'd love to hear that.
Yeah, it's a long story, but let's see. Well, it started way back in 1982, so that's how long ago. And I was supervising a psychology intern who was doing her doctoral dissertation on eating disorders. And we would get together pretty much every week, and we were joined with another woman who was a social worker who had recovered herself from an eating disorder. And so we were getting together just to talk about this because, back then, very little had been written. There were very few treatment centers. They were all hospital-based. This is back in the early 80s. So we would get together and talk about what we were seeing. And every single time we met, we said, oh my gosh, there's really a problem here. There should be a center for this. And so after we said it about the fifth time, we looked at each other and went, I guess we're it. So we created a center. And it was one of those things where you create it and they come, and girls, women of all ages, all walks of life just showed up, all struggling with some sort of disordered eating. And those no males showed up. And then I just started getting really curious about what was going on. And so I just listened as carefully as I could to the stories they told me, because I'm a storyteller and a story listener. And so that began my journey all those years ago. And, since then I've wrote the book, Eating in the Light of the Moon. And again, that just came out of, because I was working with these folks and they would say, well, where can I read more about this? And I go, I don't think it's been written. So then I started doing that, and then opened the very first intensive outpatient program in the country, actually in the world. It hadn't been done before because I was starting now to travel a lot with speaking, and I needed some place for my folks to continue to get treatment. So I created the first IOP in Hawaii, and then just went all over the place in Australia and Ireland and across the country, creating eating disorder programs, which was really a lot of fun. So, and now I have my residential facility on Maui. I really love. I'm going there in a week or two. So and then I have the Light of the Moon Cafe, which has allowed me to connect with people from all over the world online. And I'm still passionate about it. I love it.
I love that too. I know you and I are both community junkies. We just love to connect with people. And thank you for sharing your background. There's just so much creative energy in everything that you've done. Like, you are manifesting and creating so much throughout your whole journey. It's very inspiring. And I love that. And I know over these decades, you've probably become quite the expert on eating disorder recovery and, some of those essential skills on healing and reaching a point of recovery. And one of the things we've talked about that you really opened my eyes to recently is this concept of assertiveness in recovery. And I'm just really curious, could you describe like what assertiveness in recovery is, and even how did you discover that this was an important recovery skill?
Yeah, the how. I'm not really sure. It just really came from noticing because I've seen over the years thousands and thousands of people totally, completely recover. And I mean recovered, period, end of story. Even those that had the most severe eating disorders you could ever imagine, or those that had struggled since they were like 3 years old, their entire lives. And so I would look at, okay, what is it? And I would ask also, like, what is it? And the one skill that seemed essential, because I've seen thousands recover, but none of them were fully, completely recovered without this skill. And that was the skill of assertive communication, because that's the ability to identify, accept, and express your feelings in a way that honors your experience, but also honors the experience of the other. Because a lot of the hunger beneath disordered eating is for deep connection. And most of us weren't raised with the skill that taught us how to get that.
Yes, yes. I'm actually being reminded of a comment you made inside the Recovery Collective a few months back about how connection is a form of survival. And sometimes we're picking connection over, is it self-expression or inner truth?
Authenticity.
Could you dive into that? That was such a beautiful aha moment I had when I heard that the first time.
Well, the idea is that we're mammals, right? And because we're mammals, we're born with a very strong drive for attachment and connection. Because we don't hatch out of an egg like a turtle or a lizard. No, we have to connect with our caregivers in order to survive, right? In order to get fed and taken care of. And that's like our entire childhood. But because we're human mammals, we're born with another equally powerful drive. And that's the drive for authenticity. That's the drive to become who we're meant to be, to go where we're meant to go in life, to live our destiny. But what happens for all of us, some more than others, these two drives come into conflict during childhood. And guess which one wins? Attachment, connection. It has to, because we have to survive. Now, the problem with this is that this creates a pattern of whenever there's conflict between the two, we choose attachment or connection and abandon ourselves, abandon our authentic self. And we carry that pattern into adulthood when really authenticity needs to win. Why? Because whenever you choose connection over authenticity, it creates a tension inside your being. It's sort of like a towel being twisted in two different directions. And that tension even becomes painful. And we will grab onto anything to try to get relief or distraction from that pain. And for someone struggling with disordered eating, it's eating behaviors, whether it's binging or restricting or binging and purging. So lack of connection to your authentic self actually, and the tension around that creates a vacuum, and then in comes the disordered eating. So assertiveness is really the tool out, because ultimately what has to happen, people think, well, okay, I can be myself as long as I'm by myself. But as soon as I enter a relationship, I have to leave a big chunk of who I am at the doorstep. And then there's tension, right? So then it's like you're reaching for the eating disorder thoughts or behaviors or whatever they are. So what assertiveness does is it is the tool for staying connected to your authentic self while you connect with others at the same time.
That is so beautiful. And it's so important, because I feel like folks with eating disorders are so quick, and I'm not speaking for everyone, but what I've seen is that people are so quick to betray themselves in order to maintain connection. And what that ends up looking like is not expressing your truth all the time, like feeling hurt by something or feeling distressed or ashamed about something and not speaking about it or checking in with yourself and expressing that to other people is what causes the anxiety, the fear, the pain, the hurt that ends up causing people to cope with their eating disorder behaviors.
Yeah.
So it's so amazing to me how this can be, the power of assertiveness really can be used to clear the way, right? And maintain that connection to yourself. So I'm curious a little, you mentioned that tuning in is also really important. And could you share a little bit about what you know about tuning in?
Yeah, I think one of the reasons, I think your observation, I share your observation that folks who struggle with disordered eating are quick to abandon themselves. And the reason for this is because they're emotionally sensitive, highly intuitive, really good at picking up on what's going on outside of themselves. So I call them lopsided lobsters. And the reason I say that is that in Hawaii, the eel lives in a hole in the reef in the ocean. And the lobster makes its home at the mouth of this hole. Now, this is a great setup for the eel because it has a lobster on its doorstep with one antenna going out, keeping an eye out for predators. But it's a little more complicated for the lobster because eels eat lobsters. So what the lobster has to do is have one antenna going out, watching out for predators out there, but the other antenna has to go in and keep an eye out on the eel. Now, in my experience, folks who struggle with disordered eating are like lopsided lobsters in the sense that they have this brilliant, amazing, extraordinary outer antenna, right? Walk into a room, pick up on the vibe, know what people expect of you, and provide that before they even know that that's what they want. Now, remember what I said about that attachment and connection? They are incredible at picking up on other people's desires or needs and feelings. Problem is lousy inner antenna. So what happens when you're way better at picking up on and responding to the needs and feelings of others than you are at perceiving and picking up on responding to your own needs and feelings, you create a state of deprivation. And that deprivation can feel very much like hunger, right? And so what has to happen is in order to rectify this, you put that outer antenna on automatic pilot. Going to serve you the rest of your life. It's fabulous. There are people that would die for an antenna like that, right? But you then put all of your energy into creating a stronger inner antenna, which that's where the tuning in comes in from. Right? And so the way you do that, there's a couple of ways. One is developing interoceptive awareness or body awareness, where you're learning to recognize and respond to your internal body states. You tune into that, finding your hunger and satiety signals, where you're tuning in to find that rather than using some external, how many calories is this or how many, it's like you tune in. So that's what intuitive eating is. Into it, you go into it, you're tuning in. And so that's one way to do it. But also you do it by changing the questions you ask yourself. And this is where the assertiveness now comes in, because instead of saying, what's he going to say if I do this? How is she going to react if I say this? What do they think about how I'm handling this situation? Because that's that outer antenna. Instead, you say, how do I feel about what he just did? What's my reaction to what she said? What's it like for me to be here with these people at this point in time? Tuning in. And then you use the skill of assertiveness to implement that and say yes to what you want and no to what you don't want, coming from what feels right for you.
Wow. Such a great comparison or a metaphor, really, that lopsided lobster. And the whole inner and outer antenna. It's so funny because I can think back before I learned the internal awareness piece, because I had my own eating disorder too. It was like, I always just prided myself on being the person who could just go with the flow and do anything for anybody. And like, I will manage my own. I basically was just like, I'll be happy no matter what. And like very not in tune with my needs. And it led me down so many paths where I felt anxiety and fear. And it took many lessons before I was able to stop and say, hey, what do I actually want?
Yeah.
Like my needs actually matter here. And that was really pivotal in my life. And now I stop to think about what I want and consider my own needs all the time.
It's huge because you see, if you're not tuning in and you don't know what your needs and feelings are, then what's going to happen is not only are you going to act as though your needs and feelings count, but you're going to teach other people to treat you as though your needs and feelings don't count. And so when you act as though, like, let's say you say, oh, it's no big deal, when it really is, right? No big deal. That gets translated into how I think and feel is no big deal. And then that gets translated into who I am is no big deal. So that's really what passive communication is. And it messes with your self-esteem big time.
Wow. That is bringing me back because it's so true. It communicates to the world that my feelings don't matter.
Yeah.
And then it leads to people not treating you the way you deserve to be treated. So I really appreciate this highlighting of how important that step of tuning in is in order to reach this skill of assertiveness. And so my next question for you is, how does one communicate without stepping on toes or feeling like they're causing conflict? And I know that assertiveness is a neutral thing, but there's so much negative connotation next to that word in many people's heads because they're like, assertiveness means I'm mean, I'm being like bitchy, or like there's so much, sometimes negativity around that. So how do you be assertive without feeling like you're hurting other people?
Well, you need to understand what assertiveness is. And so a lot of times people confuse assertiveness with aggressiveness, and they're not the same thing. So the two primary modes of communicating that we've typically taught in our culture is passive, which is what we've just been talking about, where you act like things are okay when they're not. And you say yes to things when you want to say no. And you act as though your needs and feelings don't count, and it messes with your self-esteem. But the other way that a lot of us are taught to communicate is by being aggressive. And with aggressive behavior, it involves a lot of blaming, put down, name calling, mean, right? So unlike the passive person, when you're aggressive, you may get your needs met, but you don't care whose feelings get hurt, or as you said, whose toes get stepped on, as long as you get your needs met. And so interestingly enough, that also messes with your self-esteem because you feel out of control because you can't control other people and make them behave you the way you want to, no matter how mean you get. Right? And then there's the pendulum swing where you're passive till you can't stand it any longer. You swing over, you become aggressive, and boom, you let it all out and become really accusatory. And until you go, oh my God, okay, from now on, I'm not going to say anything, and you swing back to being passive till you can't stand it any longer. And then boom, become assertive, aggressive. So fortunately, there is a third way, and that is assertive communication. With assertive communication, you act as though your needs and feelings count, but you're respectful of the needs and feelings of others. So it's not like you act as though other people's needs and feelings are more important, but absolutely not less important, equally as important. That may be okay with you, but it's not okay with me. You may want to go here, but I really want to go there. So you're respectful, but of yourself as well, not just the other person.
I love that distinction there. You can maintain respect and value your needs and the other person's needs equally in the moment, which I think is such an empowering thing to be able to do. I love it when I can say, hey, I really want to do this. And if you want to join me, that's great. If you don't want to do it, you can do something you want to do, right? And I love that. When you see that in recovery, what are some examples of assertiveness like on a person's recovery path? that you've seen before?
Well, the results of being assertive shows up in your relationship with food. Okay. Because remember that tension I talked about? We do what we do with food when we're not hungry in response to that tension. So when you're asserting yourself along the way, you're not creating that tension, and therefore you're not going to be turning to eating behaviors or thoughts about food. But, examples are things like when you say things like that, I feel annoyed because it sounds to me like you're putting me down. Or when you say you're going to call at 6 and you don't call until 10, I feel frustrated because it seems to me that you're not appreciating how busy I am and what my time schedule is. So I'm speaking in a certain way that is, is formulaic, but assertive communication is a language. And so you have to learn it by practicing it as a skill. So really just saying to someone, I can appreciate you're really upset, but when you say things like that, it hurts my feelings. Right? So it's really a way of standing up for yourself without putting someone else down.
I love that. I think it's so helpful. And it also just reminds me so much of boundary setting and being able to set boundaries. And I feel like assertiveness and boundary setting are very related.
Oh, yeah. You use assertiveness to set a boundary. When you leave your towel on the floor, I feel annoyed because it seems to me you expect me to pick up after you. Now, what can happen, though, I do have to say this, that it's rare that someone says, oh my gosh, thank you for letting me know. I had no idea. We assert ourselves when it comes to saying things that someone may not want to hear. It's not unusual that we'll get some pushback, and it's not unusual that they might become accusatory or aggressive with us. And so there's really several parts to being assertive as a skill. When you learn how to use that formula that I mentioned to communicate, but then be prepared for when they say, well, you're always leaving your stuff around. Right? Yeah. And then there's another response to that where you don't get into fighting about who's right, who's wrong, because that's not going to get you anywhere. But you just say, well, that may be so, but I want you to know when you leave your towel on the floor, I feel annoyed because it seems to me like you expect me to pick up after you. And typically the pushback will be 3 times. I don't know why it's 3, but it just seems to be 3. Or they might say something like, well, you're in a lousy mood today. And again, it's verbal martial arts. You don't get into this. Yes, I am. No, I'm not. You don't go there. You say, that may be so. You're not saying it's so. You're not saying it's not so. That may be so. But it's important to me that you understand this is how I feel when you leave your towel on the floor. And I'll come back a third time. And again, you just repeat yourself. You deflect, and then you just repeat yourself. And the idea is that you're staying steady. You're staying steady with what your needs are, whether that's to set a boundary or to ask for something, rather than getting pulled into whatever their issues are, which is, they may be legitimate, but they can bring them up at another time. You're talking about your needs right now.
Wow. Yeah, that's so interesting how you've observed that it's usually 3 times a pushback. And the key there, which I know I've not been amazing at in my life, but I'm probably a lot better now, is staying steady in expressing your needs and expressing your emotions. So you mentioned verbal martial arts. Tell me what you mean by that.
So in martial arts, if somebody is coming at you, you don't meet them with their force. You use that energy and you just kind of move with it. You dance with it, right? If they say, well, that's a stupid thing to say, you just say, maybe so. You're not saying it's so. You're not saying it's not. You're just kind of moving around the energy. Maybe so. But this is how I feel when you say things like that. So you don't get into, going head to head. You just use the energy and you deflect it. And then you come back to your position, which is always how their behavior is affecting your feelings for their information. Now, this is important because I know some people use this differently, but some people use this communication to tell the other person how they ought to behave. And I would like for you to do blah, blah, blah. And I don't find that helpful because I think the whole purpose of the assertive formula is not to get the other person to change, much as we would like to, not to get them to behave themselves, much as we would like that. Why? Because we can't, right? You can't change somebody's feelings, attitude, behavior. You can maybe influence it, but you really don't have the power. But you do have the power to change your behavior. And so the goal of assertiveness is not to get the other person to listen to you, to be different. It might increase the odds, but that's not the goal. The goal is for you can stay and be your authentic self as you're participating in a relationship at the same time instead of using eating behaviors. That's the goal. So really how they respond is irrelevant. You can still meet your goal.
That's a really helpful point. And it's a helpful reminder because I think so many people expect some sort of request or corrective measure to be taken after. And I was actually thinking that, like, so when you think about boundary setting, do you agree that people should set a request, or is this kind of the same thing? Like the boundary is expressing yourself, expressing your emotion, and, you know, holding on to the hope that person recognizes they shouldn't be treating you this way?
Yeah, absolutely. But here's the thing. You can choose not to participate in that particular conversation or that particular relationship. You have that power. So setting a boundary is, well, if you're going to talk to me like that, I don't want to participate in this conversation. I'm willing to talk about tomatoes or, you know, something else, but not this, because it's not okay with me. And sometimes I may even mean leaving the room, right? But that is what you have. So setting a boundary, yes, set the boundary. But if the person doesn't respect that boundary, you need to then take some action, which is remove yourself from that situation. Yeah, I'm not doing this.
See ya. Yeah, that is such a helpful point, and it's so important to remember that you can't control a person.
Yeah, we like to, but I hear this a lot. People will say, well, I tried being assertive and it didn't work. And I was like, what do you mean it didn't work? Well, he kept on doing it. Well, yeah, that's not the goal. The goal is, though, if you put your feelings into words rather than through eating disorder behaviors, then you're ahead of the game, regardless of how they are. You don't need someone else to change in order for you to recover, period.
I love that. That is so good. That is a very good quote. And that it's so true, right? You don't need anyone to change.
You don't need to change. And assertiveness is the skill to change your behavior because it's a language. It's like speaking a whole new language. And once you do that, you've changed. Totally changed.
I love that. So with, you know, I completely agree that having this skill can transform a person. And you've shared that has a really beautiful impact on a person's relationship with food. Can you explain why that is?
Well, we're going back to remember the tension that gets created when you're not your authentic self. So when you're speaking your truth, using assertiveness, knowing that you are doing it in a way that's respectful of someone else, then you're in alignment with your authentic self, and there's no tension that you need the eating behaviors to cope with. So that's why it has such a powerful impact on not just achieving a recovery, but sustaining it, because it'll change your life. When I learned how to be assertive, and I didn't learn till I was in graduate school, it really changed my life, because what happens is it doesn't just change your relationship with food, it changes your relationship with other people. Because if you can think of relationships as concentric circles. So let's say there's the inner circle. That's where you hang out. And there's not a lot of room there for many people. Maybe 1, 2, 3 is a little crowded. And these are the people that you share your deepest, darkest secrets with. You just can really be totally yourself no matter what with them. Sometimes there's no one in there, and that's okay too. The next circle out are those people that you do share some really deep, meaningful stuff, but not everything. But, you share a lot, and there's a lot of connection there. The next circle out is for those people that you do share some personal stuff, but really your connection has to do with things that you have in common. You like the same books, you like the same movies, you go hiking, you go surfing together, whatever it is. But you share stuff about what's going on in your families, in your life. It's some personal stuff. The next circle out is for those people that your connection is primarily revolving around a particular activity. These are your coworkers or your colleagues or your classmates or your teammates, right? You're together. So there's not a lot of personal stuff, but you're together for a particular reason. The next circle out, that's for acquaintances. And those are the people when you meet them on the street and they say, hi, how are you doing? You don't say, oh my God, you won't believe what my mother just said. You say, I'm fine. How are you? Right? And so here's the thing though. You get to decide who goes where. It doesn't matter if you're related to them. It doesn't matter how long you've known them. How do you decide? Through assertiveness. So let's say you share something with somebody that's really deep and personal and they blab it to the whole world. Well, you move them out of circle. You're in charge of that level of intimacy, and assertiveness helps you discern who is safe to have closer in and who you want to keep at a more superficial level, given their responses to when you speak the truth assertively.
That is a really great visual to think about and apply to ourselves, right? Who's in my most inner circle, and then who's a little bit beyond that and beyond that. And you know what I see a lot in some of the clients I work with? This hope that some people could be closer, right? And the hope like, oh, my mom is always like betraying my trust and hurting me. And then I'm still trying to bring her closer to my inner circle. And I find that causes so much pain and keeps people stuck.
So, again, like I said, it doesn't matter if you're related to them. If you say, well, you know what, when I tell you what's going on with me and you say blah, 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 I feel really hurt because it seems to me that you can't appreciate how difficult this is for me. Let's say you assert yourself with your mother and she says, oh, here you go again. You're always overreacting. You move her out of the circle, right? Because she's already told you that you can't be that vulnerable, even if she's your mother, for whatever's going on with her. And this is not to blame moms, but she may not be in a space capable of that level of intimacy. And you can't get bread at the hardware store. Right? I don't care what time of day you go, right? If they don't have it to give, they don't have it to give. But that doesn't mean you can't get it. You can go to a bakery. So in that case, if you have to move mom out, maybe you might move a sister in, or a cousin, or a friend, or a coworker, or the nice lady next door, or whatever. You get to decide who goes where. And the assertiveness will help you discern that.
Beautiful. Yeah. Such a helpful reminder for everyone. Do you have any comments on self-assertiveness, or is that a thing? Is that needed, or is it all like we're talking about assertiveness towards other people? Yeah. What about assertiveness within ourselves, maybe towards the eating disorder?
I haven't really thought about it because it's really a way of speaking your truth, and it is connected to that tuning in piece. So to be assertive, you have to tune in. So that tuning in when you're struggling with the pizza and you tune in and you go, oh, I'm not really hungry, but I still want to eat that pizza. You tune in and you say, okay, what's the feeling I'm trying not to feel that might be driving me to eat that pizza, right? So it's that process of tuning in, because when you assert yourself, you own what you're feeling. So whenever you don't say, when you leave your towel on the floor, you make me so mad because you're so inconsiderate. That's not assertive. That's aggressive. So you have to tune in and own it. I feel angry because it seems to me, because I get the idea, because it gives me the impression. This is not easy. It really requires you to be assertive with yourself in that sense that you have to say, okay, what is it about that particular behavior that is stirring up this feeling in me? How come when she uses that tone of voice, I want to climb the walls? What is it about that? And then this is the hard part, but it's also the freeing part, because it's the tuning in part and really connecting with your authentic self. Oh, it's because that's the tone that my mother always used to use before she was going to walk out the door or whatever it was, right? So it takes some soul searching. That investigative part is really important. And in that way, you're being assertive with yourself.
Mm-hmm. It sounds to me that a key piece of all of this is owning everything you discover.
Yeah. And it's hard because our language teaches us not to. When you leave your town for you make me so angry. No, they didn't make you angry. You felt anger. That's real. But the reason you felt angry is because of the impression you got from them leaving the towel on the floor. Right? So nobody can make you feel anything. They can do something that'll stir that anger up, but it's your anger and you need to own it, because to not own it is to lose your power.
That is where language is so key in this experience, because I could easily feel how the wrong word in that moment could turn assertiveness into aggression.
Absolutely. Or the tone. Like you can use a tone of, condescension. That's what passive aggressive is. When you go, well, whatever, right? So with your words, you're saying one thing, but with your tone, you're putting someone down. So, that's passive aggressive. And so, even using body posture can be very aggressive. Something like this. That's great. That's blaming, putting someone else down.
Wow. Yeah. There's so much to keep in mind when you want to create or foster this skill. It's not just the words you use. It's the tone. It's the body language.
Yeah. But you can learn it. It's a skill. And in the beginning, it's like any other skill, like learning to ride a bike or drive a car or swim or play the piano. In the beginning, you're going to feel pretty clumsy. But once you get the hang of it, then it becomes a lot easier. Not that there's always situations, for myself included, where I have to go, okay, wait a minute. I got to think this out. I might even write it out ahead of time if it's a really hairy kind of situation. And I recommend that when someone is just learning how to be assertive, to use that assertiveness formula in their journal and to kind of get the hang of it. And sometimes what you have to do before, if you're going to choose to be assertive with another person and you're really upset about it, then you got to dump that someplace. So I recommend writing an FU letter if it's anger, for example, right? Where you can go ahead and swear, but this is not a letter you send them. This is a letter just for you to get clarity, just to get it out. And then you can go back and say, okay, what was it that ticked me off? And how come that ticked me off? So you can get very clear, and then you can proceed.
That's really useful advice too. It's like, if there is a lot of energy, emotion that needs to be released from that, it's like, find that way. And that is expressing yourself. That's why journaling is so helpful too. Yeah. So such an essential skill.
The good thing about assertiveness is that you don't have to do it in the moment. And many of us can't. You can be assertive an hour later, a day later, a week later, a month later, and it doesn't lose any power. And sometimes it's better because you have that level of clarity. You've done some soul searching. You've gotten clear about, all right, what is it really? What's the real issue here for me?
That's so good. Yes. it is so powerful when you can just pause, maybe remove yourself from the situation.
Yeah.
That clarity through the assertiveness and hopefully reach a place of peace within yourself and within the other person.
Yeah. And they recommend when someone's learning to be assertive, especially if it's a relationship that really matters to you, that you let them know, like you could say something like, one of the things I'm learning about my recovery is that it's really important for me to speak my truth. And I'm just learning how to do it. So I'm going to be a little clumsy. And it might seem to you like I'm picking on you, but that's just because I've really not said anything for so long. So please bear with me. I'm just learning how to do this. I'm not really meaning to pick on you.
That is my favorite suggestion, I think, because I think one of the fears I always have with changing my behavior is that it's going to take people by surprise. Like in this case, like, so-and-so, she's never assertive. And then all of a sudden she's assertive now.
All the time. It's like, it's good.
Right. And so I like prefacing it or giving people more context and saying, I'm in recovery. My coach or my therapist suggests that I practice expressing myself, being more assertive. So please forgive me if I'm clumsy at this, and then go on.
And then you do it.
And then so real, it's so authentic. To be able to do that. That's something I always love. I found that was a little skill for me, is adding context if needed when I'm changing.
And you can reference it. You can say, remember when I told you that I'm learning how, this is one of those instances where, I'm going to trip over my tongue a little bit, but I only need to do this for my recovery.
Yes. Oh, so good. Well, Anita, this has been a fabulous conversation. The time has flown by. I really appreciate you being on the show. And before I let you go, could you please share with the community a little bit about what you're up to and anything you'd like to promote? I'm happy to share that on this episode today.
Well, if anyone wants to know more about how to be assertive, I do have an online course that I teach. It's called The Essential Skill, Assertiveness, and you can access it at lightofthemooncafe.com. And I have an interactive course that will be starting up. And so if someone is interested in that, and we do cover assertiveness in the course along with many other things. So all of that information is available at lightofthemooncafe.com.
Fabulous. Well, we will provide all the links to those courses in the show notes so listeners can head on over and check those out. And again, Anita, this has been a beautiful conversation. Thank you so much for being here today.
I love meeting with you, Meg.
I really love meeting with you too. It's such a fun time. Fellow entrepreneurs, helpers in the world. All right, that concludes this week's episode of the Full and Thriving podcast. Thank you so much for taking the time to listen to this episode of the show. When you have a moment, please head on over to Instagram and follow my recovery coaching account at Meg_McCabe to stay up to date on everything I'm doing in recovery land. And if you're feeling extra inspired, please send me a direct message to let me know how this podcast has impacted your life. I'd love to hear your feedback. Thanks again for listening, and I'll see you next week.